Hi, Frank.
Hey, Mike, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. How's things going?
Pretty good. It's been a busy time as always in the world of intellectual property and high tech. Obviously, today we're going to talk about AI, but in general, this has been exciting time for anybody who's immersed in the world of technology.
Yeah, definitely. No doubt. No doubt. So let me introduce us a little bit. This is Turingsaurus Lex. It's a podcast on law and AI presented by Marveri. I am Mike Dockery. I'm a former corporate M&A partner at Morrison Foerster, and I'm the director of product at Marveri. You are Frank Gerratana. You're an IP partner at Calyx Law. You formerly were at Mint and Fish Richardson. You have a lot of great degrees in computer science, electrical engineering, and other really smart things. You've been quoted on issues around AI, blockchain, other IP matters in major media publications, and I really appreciate you jumping on today.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that too. You could have just said, "This is Frank. He's a huge nerd."
Yeah, well,
which I say proudly.
Yeah. No, wear that badge with honor, man.
Yeah,
Definitely.
exactly.
I wish I was more of a nerd. I try my hardest. So yeah, just to sort of set this up, I reached out to you. I've been wanting to have a conversation generally about, AI, how it intersects with IP issues, that sort of thing. And I had thought that this recent case that Reddit brought against Anthropic would be a good vehicle to get into some of those issues. So I reached out to you, and then I read the complaint, and I was like, wait a minute, none of this is about intellectual property. This is a bunch of other issues, but they really seem to almost be intentionally steering away from some of the IP issues that we've seen in other AI cases. But I still think we can have a good discussion around that, so why that may be. And then I do want to hit on sort of the larger IP issues around AI as well. But just to sort of set the stage, like Reddit's suing Anthropic, they're basically for scraping Reddit posts in order to train their AI. It's still very early. Basically, all we have at this point is, Reddit side of the story. We have the complaint. But yeah, just wondering, like, were you surprised by that? Like, when you read the complaint, were you going into that? I mean, you hear those names and you hear AI. For me, at least, I was thinking I would see some IP in this complaint, and there actually wasn't much, if any.
Yeah, Mike. I think it isn't, and it is about intellectual property in the sense that you're right that the particular things alleged in the complaint are not specific IP issues. They didn't raise copyright, for example, which would otherwise be the key issue when using content for that somebody owns for other purposes. But I do think it's about the same fundamental issues we've seen with AI these days. Just taking a step back, like obviously AI is a very hot topic these days in technology. It's very exciting, but it's also very controversial. I mean, it's exciting because I think it really does represent another big advance, big leap forward in the world of high tech. The same as when the internet first came about, or smartphones, or even before that. Going back to the invention of the personal computer. Every so often there's like a big advance that, sort of changes things on a grand scale. And, AI is definitely one of those. I think it's becoming one of those. Even in our industry, the legal industry, AI has started to play a big role in just our day-to-day work as attorneys. We use AI tools for all kinds of really cool stuff that we couldn't before. But I think a lot of the controversy has to do with, just generally the way that AI is going to affect our society, and specifically some of the issues with respect to, content and creativity. Right now, there's a lot of concern about whether or not AI is being used to produce creative content that will put, artists and writers out of business.
Yeah.
And, I think that's...
I mean, ironically, right? Like, in the intervening time between when we first talked about doing this and actually doing it, there was actually a much more IP focused case that came out. So like Disney sued Midjourney, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like recently, and that one is really an IP focused case. But yeah,
Yeah.
all these concerns.
Yeah, well, it's like you look. A lot of times, IP issues, fundamentally they're about business. Companies are suing each other because there's a business concern, and someone has an unfair marketplace advantage, and at the end of the day, it's about things like money and market share. But I do think there's sort of like a bigger societal issue here, which is that it's related to just like the general trend towards automation. There was controversy about automation and things like manufacturing and other areas where it started to put people out of work and change the dynamics of people's role in society. Same thing with AI. There's a lot, I think there's a lot of general public controversy over what AI will mean for creative works and for work in general. And so I'm not surprised to see that there are, now it's, poured over into the, litigation context where it is about companies, fighting with each other fundamentally. But, this is getting attention precisely because it's not just about money or market share. And I think the general issue is this, in this Reddit and Anthropic case, Reddit's a very popular platform. A lot of people go on there and it's a very popular discussion forum. People have spent hours and hours of time writing things on Reddit and having discussions about all kinds of things. And they sort of expect that those discussions happen in the context of Reddit, and obviously they're available to anybody to go onto Reddit and read and see and so forth. But now that there's kind of a changed circumstance where now AI systems like Anthropic's are being trained on all this content that people have written, people have put their their creative energy to. And I think that that's unsettling to a lot of people. The idea that, okay, so now these companies are coming along, they're training their AI systems on stuff that we wrote, and what are the implications for that? I can see why it feels unsettling. Maybe a little concerning, even violating about the use of their content in a way that they didn't expect. And I don't. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say, it's really interesting to me, right? Because it sort of suggests a shift in value for what the content represents for these platforms, right? Like before all this, Facebook didn't care about grandma's post about her apple pie recipe. Like Facebook cared about the eyeballs. All of grandma's family were going to come and read that, and then in reading that they would also see all the ads on Facebook, right? Reddit, post IPO has done a lot more of that as well in terms of advertising, trying to monetize that platform. But they didn't care about the post as posts. They didn't care about the actual language. Wasn't where the value was. It was just the eyeballs, right? But now what they've seen is these AI companies have come along and they are creating value out of the content itself. So being able to train these AI models on that language creates value directly from what the language is. So it seems to have sort of shifted the value discussion in some way. I mean, obviously advertising is still a big part of all of these companies' monetization strategies, but there's also value that they sort of weren't expecting.
Yeah. And one of the claims that Reddit makes is about unjust enrichment. The idea that, this is our platform and users have come onto Reddit, with the expectation that their content is being used in the context of Reddit discussions. Now Anthropic is coming along and using it to train their models. They're going to, I don't know how much it costs to, buy the paid version of Claude, but they're definitely making money off of their product. And Reddit certainly, has not, seen any of the value for themselves. One of the issues, in fact, they raised is that Reddit has entered into licensing arrangements with other companies, including OpenAI. OpenAI, I think, was one of the ones listed in there.
Yeah, well, Sam Altman is one of the largest shareholders in Reddit, so not surprised.
Yeah, so not surprised that there's a friendly arrangement there, and they were able to reach a deal. Again, we don't, obviously, we don't know exactly what was going on behind the scenes. But Mike, look, you can just based on publicly available.
Yeah,
see what.
Yeah, no comment on what was going on there, but it's an interesting fact to note. I mean, to me, like that that was the weird tension. One of the weird tensions that I got when I was reading through the complaint is anytime that they're talking about sort of the interests of users and users' rights. I think they brought one claim for like interference with contract, where like we can't comply with our user agreements because Anthropic is doing all whatever, but all of that, right? But they're doing it with OpenAI. Like OpenAI is doing all the same things that Anthropic did. They just have a deal to kick back some of the money, I guess. I don't know what their deal is, but
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, it is possible that when Reddit makes these arrangements with other companies, they have certain provisions in there. Like one of the issues that Reddit raised was that when users post on Reddit, they can delete their their post or the comment or whatever. And again, I don't know if Reddit does store deleted content, but it sounds like they're saying that we've agreed with our users that they have control over their content, including deleting it if they want. And Reddit users, would expect to be able to do that. Now, if this outside entity, Anthropic, is scraping all the information, the users no longer have control over where that goes. And so when they posted to Reddit, they had an expectation based on Reddit's user agreement that Anthropic violates. So again, you are correct that we don't know if Reddit was upholding those values in their agreements with other companies. I don't think any of that information is public, but I guess Reddit is saying in the complaint that they, or at least it's implied that they do that, and Anthropic didn't give them the chance to do that. At the same time, though, yeah, it does look kind of funny,
yeah, and
without knowing the details.
Like that deletion point is a really good example because, yeah, like, okay, so they could enter into an agreement with OpenAI and say, hey, if one of our users deletes their post, you're going to delete that post in your sort of, version of whatever you scraped, if it's in there. That's fine. But we all know that like once you've trained on that data, once it's in the model, you can't delete it. Like, it disappears into sort of the deep neural net, and like it's there in some sense. If this were a copyright claim, they would literally be claiming that a copy of that is sitting in the model in some way. But
Yeah,
right, like they can't delete it. So there's a tension there to me.
yeah, you're correct. Like if they have an agreement and then they use that data for training and then it's deleted later, you can't really delete that from the model. That actually, I think that speaks to one of the bigger issues why this stuff makes people uncomfortable. That the trained model is not like a database. You can just go in there and hit delete and then you're fine. In fact, I think the sophisticated machine learning, researchers and engineers at Anthropic would say, we actually don't know the nature of everything that's inside. Clearly it works, but the complexity of the model is beyond what a human being could go in and, look at and work with and so on. It's both like one of the reasons why this technology is so powerful and so cool, but why it also makes things, unsettling and creates issues like the one we're talking about right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I guess just sort of digging in a little bit, like, so I don't think they made any sort of overt claims around ownership of data, whatever that means. They didn't make any copyright claims. They made some sort of ownership-ish. I mean, I know ownership is like a fuzzy concept in IP anyway. Like there are people who would just say don't even talk about ownership because it's not really a relevant concept. But I mean, I think clearly, like, there are times in this complaint where Reddit is making a head nod to the fact that this data that we have from our users is valuable to us, and you took it from us. I mean, they talk about misappropriation by commercial actors, without compensation. That's stealing language, right? Even if they're not saying it that way. And they sort of make a nod to, without compensation to either Reddit or the users. But, that's kind of so like they're not going to settle any, whatever settlement they get out of this. None of it's coming to the people that actually wrote the post, I assume, at least not directly. But yeah, like why do you think that is? Like why clearly, I mean, I think everyone understands here that like essentially what's going on is Reddit says, hey, we have this information that we were able to gather from our users. It's valuable and you took it from us. So why do you think they didn't structure it as some sort of direct IP claim?
Yeah, so there's two reasons. One is, one is philosophical and one is practical. What are the big issues here and what could really be going on behind the scenes? I think as far as the big issues, I mean, look, you've touched upon the fact that, usually intellectual property is about, things like, money and ownership and business and things like that. That's usually the context. I primarily work in patents, and at the end of the day, it's, patents are, usually about, ensuring that, a company can retain the rights over, what they produce for the research and development. It's valuable in the marketplace. They don't want people to, encroach on their market share, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But here there is that more fundamental, philosophical issue where like just individual users do sort of expect that they have certain rights in what they've created. The intellectual property system exists, I think, in part because people do have this sort of fundamental belief that, if you created something, you have rights in it, it's yours. No one likes it when someone stole their idea. That's, probably why patent rights first came about. Nobody likes it when people steal someone's creative work. That's why copyright came about. So again, there are, dollars and business considerations, but I do think there's sort of like fundamental philosophical reasons why people believe they have rights in what they create, even if it's not something tangible. But look, I think here we've already touched on some of the more practical issues. And I think the reason why there are no intellectual property claims raised is probably connected to the fact that these issues with respect to AI and IP, and especially copyright, are murky and unsettled and being litigated in other places. So like right now, there's a big litigation. I mean, OpenAI is involved in several big litigations, but one of them is the one driven by the New York Times and media companies asserting a copyright infringement by OpenAI in training their GPT model. And, there are like, there are real unsettled issues there because this technology is new and doesn't map neatly onto, the way things have been before. So like when you're training a model on, content and that content is copyrighted, obviously you have to copy that content somehow in the training process. Is that copyright infringement? Maybe. New York Times has shown that sometimes ChatGPT will spit out content from New York Times articles verbatim. I mean, that looks like copyright infringement because it's precisely the content that the New York Times owns. But is that fair use under copyright law? Maybe. That's precisely what's being litigated. So raising copyright issues now in a separate litigation when they're already in these other big litigations and everything is pretty clearly up in the air. There's not necessarily. It's gonna be stepping into this like much larger set of issues that nobody really knows for which nobody knows where they're gonna fall. So I get why they weren't gonna step into this. Probably like one of the most complicated issues with respect to AI and training right now. And look, even more practically speaking, you mentioned the connection between Reddit and Sam Altman from OpenAI. It wouldn't make sense for Reddit to make allegations of copyright infringement against Anthropic when those same allegations are being made against OpenAI in another forum if OpenAI's people are connected to Reddit. In other words, Reddit could something could happen in this litigation between Reddit and Anthropic that would be bad for OpenAI in their litigation about copyright, and then it becomes a huge mess for everybody involved and makes already this very complicated, copyright set of copyright issues even more complicated. And so I can see why, if that's a factor, that they wouldn't want to get into it. So it's like it's a mess. It's all, even if Reddit had nothing to do, even if the people at Reddit had nothing to do with the people at OpenAI, et cetera, it would already be a messy thing to get into when people are already litigating these messy things. But there's even more reasons why it's messy. So I get why they wanted to stay away. It could be any of these reasons or all these reasons.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's sort of not straight down the line for them in the same way as, you mentioned the New York Times case. Like the New York Times, their journalists wrote all of that content, right? Like they clearly hold copyright over the content that they're claiming was taken. Reddit, I mean, I'm sure they wrote some of those posts on Reddit, but like
Mhm.
the vast, vast, vast majority of Reddit posts were not written by anyone affiliated with Reddit.
Right.
And I mean, that's kind of an irony in itself because I think maybe less so now, but certainly back, pre IPO, Reddit sort of made its brand as an aggregator primarily. They weren't a content company. They were, a place where you could go and find other people's interesting content, not the users, but like linking out to the New York Times as one example. And then people would upvote, downvote the content, but they were primarily an aggregator. They were making money on other people's content in a way.
Mhm.
So there's a sort of level of irony there where it's not one to one, but they sort of made their brand and platform on other people's content too. Um, and I get like I've heard people talk about. I don't know all the issues around it, but I've heard people talk about Section 230, which is like this the liability protection for online platforms where they're not liable for the content of their users' posts as long as they presumably meet certain elements. So maybe that had something to do with them not wanting to claim sort of direct ownership or IP rights in those posts, because there's certainly some there's sketchy stuff on Reddit that they may not want to be they may not want to be responsible for. I'm not sure how all of that works.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know precisely to what extent Reddit discusses in its user agreements who actually owns copyright to the content.
Yeah, I didn't look
Y-
either.
yeah, and and you're correct that this is sort of the actual facts can start to get messy because like yeah, again it's a I mean again Reddit's a public platform and I think you can go on at any time and look at the content without even logging in. And it's pretty publicly available stuff, and so there are a lot of ways in which if the facts were different, then there might be a stronger case, for a variety of these things. But you're correct that there's a lot of reasons why asserting IP rights, asserting unauthorized access to the platform, some of the usual ways in which people go after what they perceive as unfair use of content would be weaker claims here for sure.
Yeah, there was also and I'm still not even sure I know what it is. I mean, I remember it from the bar exam sort of vaguely, but there was this weird trespass to chattels claim, and I gather it's like you accessed our servers without permission or something. Seems really,
Yeah.
really bizarre to me, but
Well, so it's interesting. This issue of AI training is new, but this issue of accessing content for unauthorized or nefarious purposes, that's
yeah.
not new. There are yeah, for a long time there have been issues with people scraping content from other websites and using it on their own websites or using aggregators and without permission. And there's various ways in which somebody whose content is scraped would have a claim against others. And I think that here, what Reddit did in the complaint was, I'm bringing up that portion actually because I want to look at it again. Yeah, it's part of this general this sort of general issue of you accessed our servers, you got our content, we didn't authorize you to do this. There's a specific law, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, that I think has provisions about unauthorized access to
Mm.
electronic systems. Usually that only comes into play in these types of cases when you actually have to like log in, you agree as part of your user agreement that you only use the content for certain purposes. And it's sort of like a more clear, there's sort of like more clear claims that you violated our agreement or you access the system, under, false pretenses and so on and so forth. And so I think that this trespass to chattels, it seems like it's again, I remember that lingo from law school, but it usually doesn't come up in an intellectual property context. But it looks like they're basically saying the same thing, which is that like you accessed our servers, you caused problems as a result, you took our stuff, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean I think it's certainly the case. You certainly hear from other providers that scraping, presumably for the purposes of AI, has created like a genuinely increased load on platforms servers. So, and that's that's economic. That has an economic effect if you're having to maintain more capacity. So in some ways, it makes sense. I think there probably are some losses. I don't know, like Anthropic specifically scraping, what the sort of scale of that is. But I think just in the aggregate, definitely, it has become the case that scraping is creating more load.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, that's why I think, regardless of the specific claims here, I think the big picture here is that Reddit is basically saying, hey, we expect that our content, we expect that we'll have control over how this content is used, because we're a business and because our users expect it. You Anthropic, you sort of hold yourself out as like the good guys who are more focused on AI safety. And, in fact, I think a lot of the founders of Anthropic, some of them came from OpenAI in part out of, allegedly concerns about how OpenAI was operating. Again, I don't know if that's just marketing or if that's actually, actually the case. But again, as we talked about, there are real concerns. And so Anthropic's brand has been built in part around this idea that like, hey, we're the good guys in this industry. And so Reddit is asserting, hey, you are not being the good guys. You wouldn't make an agreement with us. You're doing this thing that makes users uncomfortable, and we won't take it anymore. And again, behind the scenes, is there some other factors at play? Is it secretly a proxy fight between Sam Altman, who's involved with Reddit, and so on? Yeah, that's probably a factor too. We don't know, but like, look, it's very easy to assume that's also one of the big issues at play. And again, at the end of the day, they had to make claims in their complaint, and this is what they chose based on what's been done before in comparable web scraping cases.
Yeah. Well, just so we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to take a step back and just ask you generally, what's your sense of how IP claims in particular, what's your sense of how they're going to play out here with AI and with AI specifically?
Yeah. So again, the big picture is, because this technology is new and just operates differently, it raises new issues. It's I'm not surprised to see that there's a lot of litigation about it. And with respect to IP, again, as an IP attorney in high tech, AI is the biggest issue across all realms of work that I do. I mentioned I primarily work in patents, and a lot of the patent applications I help companies with these days are on AI technology itself. But
how many of them are written by AI?
So it's interesting. I've just started to use some of these AI-based tools and try them out. And for patent work, there's some like pretty good stuff. It's not like it's not at the point where you can just press a button, the computer is doing your job, but it is definitely automating some of the more like there's parts of patent work that involve a lot of thought and creativity, and I love. And there's some parts of it, it's just like turning your crank. It's not really, you just got to like sit down and do the thing or crank out the whatever.
Yep.
AI is definitely speeding up some of those aspects of things. So I like it because it's allowing me to spend more time on the part where I really add value. In 10 or 15 years, will the robots be doing my job? I don't know, maybe. But at that point, I think there'll be bigger implications for society. So we'll see. But I'm very optimistic about these tools. I think they're doing really cool stuff. As long as you understand what they do and what they can't do, There have been a lot of examples of lawyers using AI and getting into trouble because they were using them in ways without, doing the appropriate quality control, or just using them for stuff they shouldn't have. But yeah, no, getting back to like sort of the big issues, I mean, I'm seeing AI being used in like, every industry. I've historically worked with the high tech industry, but I see it being used a lot with the life sciences industry. I'm working with life sciences companies on AI based inventions. That's pretty cool. And now this copyright issue is one of the bigger ones. Historically, when I worked on copyright issues, it was usually in software related things like open source issues, open source software, stuff like that. But now everyone is wondering, if is training an AI on copyrighted content, is that copyright infringement that's being actively litigated? And if I use AI to produce content, can I claim rights over that? The answer is probably no, unless it's a human contribution. And so but again, I think that still, might be subject to future, legislation, or maybe the courts will see it a different way in certain circumstances. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of stuff that is genuinely up in the air from a legal perspective. So it's an exciting time to be an intellectual property lawyer. But it also means that, like, when clients come to me and ask, can we do this? What does this mean? What are the implications here? I have to give the worst answer that no client wants to hear from a lawyer, but always gets, which is, well, it depends, or that's gonna it's gonna rapidly change in the future. I mean, look, if I had to guess, like, these issues of content and content ownership, we're probably going to see some resolution to it one way or the other. Not just as these litigations proceed, but I think that Congress is going to get involved. It's usually hard to get the government to pay attention to IP issues, but because this issue of AI is such a hot topic in the public consciousness, I think there's a real chance that there already has been like AI related legislation that's going through, but at the state and federal level. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, some sort of AI related, IP legislation, federally, because, unless all the court decisions are like really clear and everyone's really happy with them, which usually doesn't happen, we're probably gonna have to see some kind of legislation too.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that would be the case. Certainly other countries, I know that the UK, I think just this last week, sort of passed some legislation around some of these issues. And I think it's still up in the air. In copyright specifically is still up in the air, both in the UK and the EU. We saw the copyright agency, the federal copyright agency in the US, put out some guidance, I think recently, although people weren't completely convinced that it cleared anything up, which
Right.
maybe isn't that, it could be counterproductive in all honesty. Look, it makes sense to me that the federal government should be passing legislation to solve some of these issues. I'm just not sure I'm confident that that they will. I mean, to me it feels like it's going to play out in the same way as privacy, where there's broad consensus in both parties that privacy, for example, needs to be addressed at the federal level, but they just can't get anything passed for reasons outside of the substantive issues, I think. And I could very well see AI playing out in the same way, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, we need clarity around some of this stuff. To me, it feels like some of it is resurfacing, our copyright, all of our IP regime is based on a world that doesn't even exist anymore. And we sort of kludged together some solutions, like when the internet came out, and because the whole ethos of the internet, I mean, literally, the technology, one of the major technologies that brought about the modern internet was hyperlinks, just linking freely to other people's content, right? And sort of creating connections between your content and their content. And then, of course, there was all the stuff around music with Napster and all of those platforms. And we sort of kludged together. I mean, we got through it. We kludged together a regime that at least everyone sort of could roll with, even if they didn't agree with it. But this seems to be raising some of those issues again in different ways. I mean, it in some ways, it's like the peer-to-peer file sharing stuff where, yeah, OpenAI apparently can spit out New York Times articles verbatim. But in this case, that's not why OpenAI, that's not why ChatGPT exists, right? Like,
Right.
Whereas, I mean, I know they would argue otherwise, but clearly Napster was built so that people could steal music. I mean, that's why it existed. That's how everybody used it. But I don't think the majority of users are going to ChatGPT in order to pull out copyright content. And I certainly don't think that's the reason it was built.
Yeah, you've touched on this. I would say just the core tension, which is that some people believe that whatever the legal framework is, it should ensure that the human beings who create creative works, who are writing, who are artists, producing films, whatever, should have their rights upheld. Because again, I think we as humans, feel a sense of ownership over what we create. And if these systems are using our work, then do they need to ask permission? Do we need to be compensated? Whatever we need as human beings, that should be upheld. But other people view AI as a situation where just like we as humans, read and experience media and so on and so forth. We're learning, we're developing thoughts, and what we produce is not a derivative work of what we read or saw or whatever, but it's entirely new things. They see AI as the same thing. These are just the robots, reading and interpreting and so on and so forth, just in a different way than human beings do. So I get the tension there. I do hope that the rights of people who create creative works as their way of making a living are continue to be upheld. But I totally get this idea that the power of AI, could do great things for us, and putting a lot of restrictions on that might interfere with the innovation that comes along with it.
Yeah, I mean that's how the AI companies are trying to position it, is like, look, if we can't do this unless we have access to this data. This data is freely available to everyone else. We're not providing it to anyone. We're consuming it ourselves. In the same way that anyone that goes and reads the New York Times is consuming it. We're not, copying, providing it. But there's real tension there. I mean, it's not. I don't really fall on either side of it. I mean, it's a new thing. It's a new thing, and I think yet to be seen, sort of how the law will resolve this. And to me, like, an open question is how it should be resolved. To be honest, like. It's definitely the case that AI presents a very real danger. Putting aside, and I think that's kind of the point. Is in the background, to me, it feels like a lot of this is not really about what everyone says it's about. I think what's going on is people are worried, creators are worried that they're gonna be obsolete, right? Like, you don't need anyone to write the news because AI is just going to write the news. You don't need anyone to create movies because AI will just create the movies. And you can't really sue on those grounds. You can't say, hey, I'm entitled to a job as a content creator and this is going to put me out of business. So it feels like part of what's going on here is like, look, this is how we're going to protect the ramparts of our industry by, suing on other grounds. But yeah, I mean, I understand those concerns, and so and certainly don't want to see human content go away.
Right, and yeah, exactly, and that's why again, getting back to this particular case we're talking about, the Reddit Anthropic one, I think it is really about some of these bigger issues and not about the specific claims they made in the complaint. And probably also about some of the specific interests of the companies involved and so on too. So is it about these big philosophical issues? Maybe. Is it just about companies fighting with each other and using this as a proxy issue? Probably also.
Yeah, no.
But I think for Reddit users, I think that Reddit would not have brought this suit if they didn't think that they were on the side of their users, and if they didn't think that Reddit users would see it as Reddit standing up for them, even if there's other, business or whatever considerations behind it too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's certainly an aspect of it. I agree. Okay, so I know I've kept you like way over. So
Oh, I love this stuff. I'll talk about AI and tech and IP and everything all day.
yeah, I'm sure there's going to be plenty more opportunity. There's going to be lots of litigation going around. We've already seen it. So hopefully you'll come back on and talk about some of those cases as well. But let me just wrap us up here. So I want to mention that we're presented by Marveri. Marveri is an AI-powered platform that helps corporate lawyers quickly make sense of large groups of documents. It's super useful for M&A, for onboarding new clients, really any legal task that requires quickly digging into and understanding a lot of documents. If anyone's interested, you can go to marveri.com. You can sign up for a demo. We love showing off the tool, so welcome people to do that. Frank, if there's anything you want to point people towards, anything you want to plug, feel free.
Just that my law firm, Calyx Law, we focus on the world of technology startups and life sciences startups, and AI is the biggest topic these days in the high tech side. But we also work with many other issues and startups and tech companies of all time of all kinds to help them with their intellectual property and business issues.
Awesome. Well, let me say thanks to everybody that listens to these things. If you have feedback, we're already getting some great feedback. Feel free to look us up on LinkedIn, send us over a message, or drop comments. However you want to get us that feedback, we love hearing it. There's going to be more content coming. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us on LinkedIn. But yeah, hope everyone will stick around. And Frank, really appreciate you joining me and hope you'll come back sometime.
Will do. Thanks for having me, Mike. This is fun.
See you, Frank.